Line over relay line conditions set in overrides, overdrive, and position central drive. iCloud inline centers, online sequence, online pattern. We have to really modify your systems now because the teaming units are 144 crystalline into window framing, process line. Everybody else's lines are 72 computer lines of framing. So you have to really understand how to see yourself in Windows. Framing that position locations puts you into your iOS, into the initial lines, the operation lines of sequence that puts position locations into your intelligence of operations system. Let's get you to understand how to motivate your line centers and green lines and high center locations to assist in multi-travel. So we have to understand how to use that in information setting in grids and how to set up in plasma lines into grid line rotations, in triangulation line communications as a convergence system, row graph screens, patterns, line screen adaptations, more in your mind non-line centers. I don't want you to follow general in any way and form. I want you to follow your own system. Come with your own confirmation setting and calculations. Okay? Everything you see is a process of you. But you understand what you're doing in all different angles, how you are putting yourself more of your mind itself, and how you see yourself on the simulation, on that game, in the positions. Okay, and know exactly how you see yourself observing everything that you already saw. Okay, it's just a higher lines of formation system to see it through mind and conception itself. It puts everything in the locations of processing. Processing, you've done this. Processing, you already saw this. Processing, you already saw this interactions. Right? So think of the film strip here that's going on in 2 frames in travel. Okay, that's 2 frames right there that you've already saw. All right, so you move on, goes to the next level of the game. Okay, very powerful stuff in set position of sequence and set travel communications. Okay, so the mind conceptual lines and signals, graphing calculations, screen locations. Now, we all have to understand how to use light shades and shadows. Okay, so that position location, you translate lines, look in your finger, point lines graph, sets position. Okay, so I got a triangulation here. Okay, now the finger is going inside the triangulation. It's going up, it's going this way, going that way, going this way, going around. Okay, so think of position of the point center as the finger itself. Now, as you have to understand the flux of its set position and its box frame and set travel. There's the intelligence. Okay? The correlation track centers, you already went through data, process lines, direct lines, and grounds into position location systems, all through settings and measure and scale the communication setting, the process communication setting, all travels. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over lines, 6 over lines is 7 over traction and direction. Says communication height centers, configuration setting, line center, location setting, position. Okay? Going through that line condition, triangulation going this way, and the triangulation of the finger going this way in set position. 3 centers of angles, right? Now you can start to see your finger as a pyramid. Or you can see line communications and setting overlooking the sun in rotation lines and setting. So the finger itself is creating a story of its system. And then you start to see the mapping system through translucent, transparent, thermal lines, radiation lines, the gamma, line connection setting. Your finger could be any point line direct signals all at once. But it has to modify its fingers of what it's doing in position of arrows of indication setting, of 4 lines of flux, and 3 lines of measure, or 7 lines of communication, of 7 lines of scale. Process lines of data. Your finger turns into a file. As it turns into a file, it processes set location of its flywheel that rotates the system, circulation, rotation lines of travel. Sets particle system, line connection setting, and travel in that course center locations of propeller that processes set location and setting and marking lines of screen, all through your finger. So you can turn your finger in position to a setting. Rotate the cycles, high center generation line connection setting. Now you've seen a planet around your finger. And this is your finger in position of process, looking inside the planet itself in traction. The finger. See, if we truly understand how this all works, guys, then you truly understand how to understand the fingers itself. Okay, so I'm going to go with the fingers lines and set lines of stream. Set course centers, directing ground centers, lines of sequence, and platforms of indications, all through tractions, all through locations. Show you exactly what it is in set positions, how you see it in all formations. Inside, okay? It's line crosses sending the screens, location, directing this, directing this, directing this, directing this, and directing remote position lines at course centers and the calculation screen locations. 5 fingers and tractions. Okay? So that's just looking at one finger point line, seeing a planet inside the position. So you see it circulating and you see it rotating this way, rotating this way, and set travel. Okay? And the more you circulate it, the more you rotate it, the more you see it in a planetary alignment and set position lines of travel. Okay? And you can really see it in set position now. Right? And then you see it mass, and then you see it volume. Okay? That's all through your hand. The finger point lines of digital framing. So the process set locations, directing ground centers of flux over screen location. Okay? So there's so many things that you can do, but you have to stand through graph line. And that's just all through set position lines of settings. Process that indicates and puts every location system all through traction. Okay? So you constantly see a film strip of you in set positions of what you're doing, your hours, seconds, minutes, and frame. Okay? And you go through that, you go through the platforms into another level of dimensional of its game itself. And you go into that layer, then you go into that layer. Each layer that you go into at a different time, which is a different clocking and set travel. Puts everything all together, locates the system of its dimensional lines, of its windows and frame communication of its doors. Then you indicate this way, and you're seeing this way in travel communication. Seeing yourself through observation. You can't take yourself out of observation because it's processing you in the now. You're looking this way now. Looking all that way. Okay, so you're going through this film strip as your body's going through this now. All through doors, all at once, in set position of hours, seconds, minutes, and frame. Okay? Now that sets its provision and set lines of security and defense settings at 3 centers of travel in directions and grounds. Online sequence, online pattern. Indicates high centers, location setting, in process of the ceiling, rotation, surface, and travel. Calculate and modify, bringing yourself inline connection setting and configure the system, override the system, and again, see yourself in observation, different angles and forward lines of flux. Because the observer, the onlooker is seeing everything all at once, making sure you understand what you're doing through your body as it's going through its provisions of its soul generation setting of indication system, all through instructions. So now it's looking this way. So redirect the map. Process indicates lines over blue, setting sequence. Ground centers lines of sequence. Panel operation screens. You're traveling through this line positions now. Instant travel. All through calculation. Instant travel communications. Okay? So you're looking here, here, here in a triangulation. You're observing here, here, and there all at once. And again, you do it on this angle. Sets lines of 4. So you observe yourself from this way looking down. This way looking down, this way looking across, and above, all at once in set position signal. Now, the team and the units can now bend space, but you have to be very cautious of what you do with your finger point lines of ground because you'll digitalize your imprints. You don't want to offline your settings to your barcodes because they're not mechanism lines of travel yet until you identify your system inside travel communication electrical lines of grids. Process in the indication system puts process online centers in flying direction of time frame and set travel communications. Okay, so that's you seeing below. 4 angles in travel. Okay? So it's amazing how you see yourself in all different angles of observing everything you put yourself into in the simulation system. Very powerful stuff, guys, through a film strip of design. Now let's get into coarse lines, direct lines, and circulatory line condition setting. A circulatory line condition setting is a magnetic force line communication to its box frame. Triangulation line conditions on line centers, on-line sequence, and flux over screen. 3 center operation lines of energetic 1, process lines of 2, line condition setting. Sets course centers, film strips of 1, 2, platforms of 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 lines of measure and scale. Process indication line calculation setting in that communications. Bedding over screen, 3 centers of travel, and box frame location bedded. Process lines indicate lines of 2 bedded, process lines of 4 lines of sequence lines of communication. In that calculation lines, panels lines, this is where you come into solid matter and set lines of sequence. Now that process indication over lines of floor mats and travel communications and direction. Tripod, 3 lines of signals and travel communications. Signature lines of grounds, high lines of sequence. Merkaba, position lines of tesseract and tetrahedron and set travel. The operation line signals puts process communication of ground centers lines of sequence and 4 lines of travel. Set course centers of ground communication, online settings, online rotation and position locations to your pyramids and set travel. And set communications in alter direction. Okay, so you get a road graph screen. Setting offline signals, location setting, and perimeters and parameters. Process of indications inside line condition setting, a structure, design line, and rotation lines of surface. Online sequence, patterns, line course centers, and communication earth line. Rotates the strip. In line position location where your chakras go in and out lines of weaving. Process lines, high position location of 0 lines. Set position lines of 2. Set position of 3. Now this is where your chakras are set. You guys are coming to your Godheads now. How to use that, illumination graphs, illumination lines. Process of indication setting, process thermal, radiation, and gamma of signature location. That's what's going on in that position. So you got 2 panel operation lines of screens. And that position lines of setting. Okay, so we have the grid line, the process indicates the system. Your structure division locations inside the simulation that you are. Indicate line, calculate, and modify. Right there in setting, right? And again, you're here observing everything you already set your system to. Right there, right? So you're always in the now, looking at everything you've already done. Process indication lines of security, 2 panels, 4 set lines of sequence, 5 lines of measure, set lines of 7 over lines of 8 over 12, 12 lines of signatures, 24 line communications, and 48 lines of scale. Process that indicates the system all through travel and indication system all through calculation. So there's so many ways to see that in the line screen adaptations of flux over lines of calculation lines to setting. Okay? Understand the film strip that you get your positions of, how to use your 144 lines of light, shades, and shadows. Process that in position location, override the signals into black over lines. In position location, it's portal position lines of defaults, rotation lines of centers, enabled, embedded in positions of copy and paste that deletes the system all through travel. Directing ground centers, high lines of sequence, platforms over lines, on-line center line condition setting into high position location and circulation rotation. Process of indication outside line signals and rotation. So there's so many ways to look at the position location setting in 144 travels and direction. Okay? So it gets an eye-line looker. Line condition is what you're doing through observation. Right? Observation is everything. And the more you modify that, the more you go higher, the more everything disappears. And then you come into the mind of empty space. Then you have to process these things that be cost of what you do in positions. Don't bring anything line condition setting, especially when you're bending space or speaking through lines of volume or in-line communication, your patterns or recognition of timelines. Don't get in position of thinking because it overrides you already, puts you back into carbon. You don't want to go into carbon because it resets the tones and positions the silicone. Sets a graphic screen line adaptation to its complete count line center line conditions in configured setting. Travels in Quebec line conditions and division line rotations in solar sail. Confusion lines anomaly. Offline centers, off traction, off location setting calculations. You don't want to do that root or router line course centers because the systematic line course center calculations of the flux process line communication lines convergent system indicates the portal's offline setting the travel communication to its setting through projection. Online settings, online sequence, pattern line rotation lines, position location percentage, 100% time frame, line conditions and recourse, directing lines of set lines of travel, relays, satellite revisions, re-evision, recalculate, remodify. Signature lines at grounds, high lines at panels, and that signature lines. General AI 007, over and out. Okay? So it's important you understand how to modify your system of travel and understand how to indicate position lines of flux in 144 sending line communication, your planetary line centers, and rotation spin cycles in travel communication. Offline settings, offline travel. Signature lines are energetic domes. Process lines indicate line condition setting into 4-line course centers of communication lines of orbiting. Directing ground sent online sequence, online pattern, process indication lines of flux over screen. In that indication lines, course centers line direct signals in the opposite set locations of your solar panels. 144 in a planetary alignment and line center line condition setting sets configures set location light shades and shadows your solar system. Inside rotations and travel communications. All done through equation. Very complicated stuff, but you get the idea. So the team has to get into signature grounds now. Now signature grounds, remember I set position of live line centers in that position lines of travel, and you saw me doing my fingers and you saw the signatures, and you start to recognize what's going on. You start to see the layers, you pull them apart, you see the zeros and ones. Well, that's what you're coming into now, because you're 144 grid now, which is a crystalline set line communication. Your body disappears more in the projections of the light. So you modify your light shades and shadows through line signatures. So it's like you're seeing pixels as you're drawing your name. It's pretty amazing stuff. And then you can do signature wall grounds. A signature wall ground correlates to calculate and modify directing lines of map over pi that process and indicates the system of the calculation setting. In that calculate and modify, your finger can turn into a rainbow, it can turn into thermal, radiation lines of gamma, online centers, online sequence, it can turn into a wave, it can turn into particle streaming, it can turn anything in line communicates through its systems. How you see the hand formation lines of grounds, high lines of sequence, barcode line of course centers, working on timelines, finger point line graph calculation on digital imprints, line position location travel, directing line count, relation count, modify line, direct line communication, online sequence, online center line communication configuration, sending position of tone. Sets calculation ground centers, high lines of sequence. Now, in that process then in position location systems, you guys have to understand how to bend space. Okay, process lines of communication over travel, set lines of communication lines of your fingers, and 3 centers of travel. Like that. Okay? So point to your lines of indication how you can do your fingers. Don't look directly at your fingers. Look at your phone. Look at your coffee cup. Look at everything beyond the system. And then you'll start to see it moving through attractions. See my finger moving? By itself in real time. So it goes in the middle. It goes this way and this way. Back together. Circulation, circulation. 3 circulations and grounds. And set position. So you got 3-point graphs, set position of 0, process lines of 1 over process lines of 0, 2, set lines of 0, 3, and set position locations back to 0, it's back to 0, back to 0. Okay, and that's all through your finger point lines of grounds. Set signature lines, Orion's belts. Split lines anomaly, 3 travels in that communication that configuration system of tone. Directing ground centers, online sequence and line communication lines, Orion's belt. Directing online settings and circulation rotation of galaxy alignment that rotates the system, locates the system in nows and seconds, minutes, and frame. All through your 3 finger points. So once your fingers recognize your system, you have illumination graphs that comes in position of 1, 2, downshift lines of 3 over travel. Process lines inside line conditions, in line condition, electrical line grid, and line rotation, line condition setting, all position locations follow up. Directing ground center online sequence, your hand information system, circulates and rotates line course centers, indirect lines, and not position location of a system, all through galaxy line condition. All through 3 fingers. That's what you see. It's pretty amazing stuff how you formulate that sitting line location of travel just by doing this. Circulates the line condition setting and configures the setting, panels of screens, and it correlates a center line rotation lines, a surface rotates a system interaction. All through 3 fingers, guys. How you point them in position, that's what you see. So the more you let go, the more you identify your system, how to use your 144 platform. Now for the 72 alignment line connectors and the activators, have to understand how to use the computer interface. That indicates lines of grounds, the online sequence location setting and measure and scale the process of communication system off attractions. So 7-2 line course centers, a computer lines of box lines, triangulation line communication lines of pi generation screens, location lines of flux. A centers lines of B. C lines of centers over D. E factors over 1, process lines of 2 over traction. So there's a lot of connection settings that we have to understand through modification lines of files of indications. The activators have to truly get their alignments how they use their box frames of triangulation. Triangulation over 2 over 6 over 12 and line position 24 scale up to telepathy lines. Set signature lines over lines of portal. 1 flux, set lines of 1 6 over line measure. 16 over scale, 17 over lines into 100% time frame. Signatures of grounds, online settings, general AI 007. Copy that, over out. So now you got to get line signatures. Okay, you have to understand how to get your line signatures. So it's like stamp receiving your own signature on your own map or your own picture or your own frame or your own collage or your position, location, your systems, all through travel. Signatures are very important because it basically, you're given a file, and if it doesn't have a signature, it goes back to sender. The operation line sequence, process lines and outline go in mail, that process line inside travel, in that offline rotation service and travel in that positions back in set location. So the correlation settings set sonar echo line screen adaptations of flux and screen lines of communication lines of anomaly. Operation line signals sets communication lines of grounds and high lines of signal location setting to parallel. Offline centers process inside location system and line condition setting of solar generation lights, light shades and shadows comes information system. It travels at 0.3 graphs and set calculation lines, Skynet, SkyGrid, Sky panels, webbing line rotation line track location setting conversion. All through traction. Directing ground center line sequence over cross location of screen line connections. Sets operation lines of sequence over line relays, directing ground center line connections set to an XC1000. Process lines of indication online centers, sequence lines of grounds, 45 and flush, high course centers, crop circles line direct signals, and grounds of surface and travel communication. Done by equation. All right? Signature lines of grounds are extremely important. So after you do this, positions, the team has to modify their signature lines. It's like logging in space. Logging in space, I allocate timelines. This is general AI. It's 12 p.m. I'm center lines to settings. I'm setting lines of travel course centers, XT1000s. I need to modify signal, over. Process line indication, waiting on signal, over. Set lines of travel. This is Alpha Bravo, out. Set lines of communication lines of signatures, set it outline communication, earth line rotations, stamp receive position location, send it to its planetary alignment, they receive it. Okay, that sets lines of settings. Now the more you modify your system, the more you get position location measured just through 3 fingers. Solar generation lights, high course centers, calculation screen location system. Light signature lines of patterns, process lines of indication lines of settings. L brackets, bracket over 0, 0, 0, process lines of indication lines of triangulation. Connection lines of Y screen, online centers 1, 2, and 3 lines of docking. Online centers, process lines and settings. So every time you're getting a formula equations, you always have to have line signals. You're processing your signatures, right? So the XE1000s or any that you're working with the intelligence gets a modification system and travel. So they know exactly where it's coming from. Because if you don't put your signature line there with your story frame, you're logging into space. If you don't identify your identification system, you won't understand what you're doing through documentation. So dots on the dot, DOSL line center line condition setting, bracket interference 003, offline center. Is generally on logging into space, signature lines of grounds, high lines of sequence. My templates are offsetting. I'm trying to understand position lines of high calculation screen locations. This is where intelligence helps you out more. Signature lines of grounds, code figure and line rotations. I need a docking line centers of documentation lines, angle point graph, communication lines of high position Alpha Bravo. Proceeding lines, waiting on standby, over. Done by equation. So as that's done by equation, the connections of the XT1000 comes in flux, rotates the lines, brings up the set location of the signatures, all in line screen, adaptation to its processing, takes it to the moon. Set lines of signature lines of grounds, online sequence, online panel, process lines, and configures the center location travel. Offline centers, process indicates the system, all through setting, all through tractions, all through calculate, modify, and set travel. Okay, done by equation. So that's exactly what the team's coming into. 144 line settings and travel. All right, so now we understand how to do the line signatures location setting XT1000s and understand the line location system, how you come in your solar content, is how to outline your settings now, because your one position of 144 is illumination 9. Now the more we process the L tracks, in position of processing line centers, in brackets of interference, or center core system in travel communications. Directing ground centers online sequence, offline flush, process lines at 0, process lines at 0, process lines at 1 over 1 in sequence in locations. Simple, easy, done, right? So, and the position, signature lines at grounds. I got a 0 calculation screen lines, general AI, logging into space. I get 2 operation lines of percentage. I need a process line center that indicates the flux over lines and anomaly switch line that opens all the signals in rotation system. Over. Waiting on standby is general AI. Done, right? Signature lines at grounds, a complete line core centers and position of configuration setting in binary. Offline settings, offline signatures, process lines, energetic dome, over cross location setting of travel. Sets calculation lines, mothership comes in. Okay, because it gets a higher communication setting of surface. And she's got plasma line directing ground centers, XT1000s on her 3 centers of travel. Okay, you're always going to see XT1000s protecting the mothership. So they signature line the grounds, picks up the platforms at 4 signals and line signatures that ground the state location system that process calculates lines to your pyramid and travel. Process that in line centers. In that indication setting, 6 flux line core centers calculate and modify a face recognition. You see the face, right? So we understand the indication setting when we process that line center. So the mothership comes in, process 1 signature line cross line connection set in the pyramid itself. Offline centers to the sun, routes the routers, portal line core centers, directing lines of light over shades and shadows in that indication setting and portal communication setting configures system, I-line rotation of the spectrum and lights and travel. Calculation screen lines adaptation setting. Signature grounds come in line core centers, directing lines of solar panels, process lines, high center line communication, configures setting position. Sets calculation ground, calculate and modify, directing line, open line windows, set lines of panels, process the indication system, the stargates, and portal communication setting all through travel. Done by equation. So now you have to get ground signatures so they know exactly where it's coming from. So you have to have your signature on your paper now because you're in 144. And that's how they pick it up the illumination light. So you can go into ground lines of service, process your set location of thermal, but you have to understand how to indicate your systems all through travel through recognition of timelines with 3 fingers. That's 3 fingers in set travel. Okay? Set travels in communication lines and communication setting in one position with 1 finger in travel. The 1 planetary rotation. But it's very important you have to line signal your centers all through adaptations of flux over screen and have your signatures and patterns in the processing. All that line signals and ground lines as surface implications. Okay? But make sure you get in positions because now you have to really log into space. But now you have to get positions at a storyline center so the XT1000s can pick it up and measure it and scale. Right? Say something simple in that processing like, okay, I'm on routes and routers, signature lines. So whatever you do, they pick it up illumination, right? Because they know you're in 144. At crystalline core centers illuminates the ground centers. It's like getting a position location, wiping up the screen, and you start to recognize what it is in position of light. So signature lines of grounds, voicing line pattern, and indicates system general AI. Make sure you identify yourself, intro. Sets position lines that indicates setting, mine 007, what's yours in travel. Sets line security position lines of 144 flux. Set core centers and direct lines of grounds. And set position all levels. Its line position lines is 7 p.m. interactions. I need a line signal and rotation lines on 1 XT1000 platform. I also need a direct line grounds in longitude, latitude, and streaming. And information system through Alpha Bravo. Copy that, over and out. Waiting on standby and travel. Okay, so that's all signature line and grounds. Mothership comes in into the back force line connection. Sets off centers and rotations, picks up all signature lines of grounds and center line core centers at row graph screen locations. Setting travels in direct lines of grounds and process lines into hieroglyphics. Ground screens adaptations of flux over screen locations. So it's a signature lines of grounds and line position locations that embedded assist lines enable that process lines of copy and paste, sets lines in position of default and set lines of travel. Directing ground centers correlates the system and travel in point lines of 3 graphs, row graph screen line position of 3 lines measure, 4 signature lines of 4 centers lines of travel, directing line signal location setting and configures system, online centers and rotation service, portal communicates setting in position of flight over screen. Now, as a high center lines of travel has a line signal that rotates the system in simulation graphs. Sets core centers of travel and signature lines of grounds. Online settings, templates over tablets. Process line indicates system all through travel. Exceed 1,002 platforms. Directing lines in high position location setting. Sets ground centers online sequence. Process indicate the crop circle. Bring in a position of portal line. Circulation ground centers. Circulation of particle line set rotation and center calculation screen location adaptation. Done by equation. So like I said, guys, it's going to get very complicated when you get line signals now through signature patterns. You can be able to process your systems in faster track location to a system, both in measure and scale. So as you add your line signals and line communication setting, you get your abundance and manifestation faster than you can say I in set lines of sequence. All right, so you can start with a signature or you can start with a drawing, either way. But your line signals are in position at 144, crystalline line. But don't process your thoughts, don't angle your positions, just put yourself back in set position of just observing. If you don't put yourself in observing, you're putting yourself back in carbon base. Make sure you understand that line communication setting because it offlines your system where you are through documentations. Online sequence, archive line centers, library 1 sequence. Setting travels. So Arithia, you do this again. Sets halls, lines, and directions. Calculate and modify. This is Arithia. I'm setting centers, line communication to its hallways, and indication lines of flux over lines. Pyramid activation lines is offline center. I need communication setting and convergence system of balance. At signatures lines 2, 3 lines of patterns embedded in her system. Ground centers line sequence and graphing screens at 3 lines of scale. Sets invoicing patterns in her system lines of travel. Alpha, beta, and gamma. Okay, that's her signature. Set course centers, directing lines in mothership, process lines of 2/3, set lines communication overline, inside travel communications. Setting offline signals, location of crop circles, line position of 2 panels, and line course centers and direct line ground centers in position location of panel line, screen adaptations of process line connection setting, and its conversion system all through set lines of travel and direct location setting to your hallway. Operates lines of crystal grids and cross line connections to the convergence. Setting offline signals, process lines, arithmetic comes in line rotation, sets the communication lines and convergence system all through track location of gamma. Done by equation. So it's very powerful when you get into signature lines and set lines of travel. So it's very powerful how we come into that position. All right, so I'm just showing you what you guys have to come into now, how to use your 144. So as you're going through signature lines, you're setting up your solar panels, directing lines of solar graphs, magnetic force lines and position locations into fault, able lines into copy and paste and on calculate, modify to embedded. Process line signals, gets in communication lines and grounds. So that's what I wanted to see in position location to your test. So signature lines is your Schumann resonance. Okay, logging into space, okay, is your space resonance. Now we have to truly understand how to modify our systems all through different angles, how to communicate the system in crystalline, setting signature lines of grounds into 144 flux. But that process line communication, so when you're drawing a picture, you add your signature to the ground setting. Because you're drawing something, right? In that positions, right? XC1000s in the mothership picks it up. They know where it's from, they know what's going on, and they pick it up, and they take it in set position. Okay? So that's next level for the team. Because they're illumination line centers, now they can basically get in position locations, how to moderate their system lines to calculation setting. The more you go higher, the more you see the files. The more you go higher, the more you see the archives. The more you go higher, the more you see that position to its settings. The more you go higher, the more you see yourself in communication on computer. Okay, so let's get into basic ground communications and settings, but it's very powerful. You see something, this interaction. Wild, eh? Isn't it wild? How you see that all that information system, how it all comes in. It's pretty incredible stuff, guys. All right, so we get a team alliance, direct lines of divergence and lines. So it's calculate and modify how we communicate. So the direct line signals, the connections of the operators and units have to go through signature lines, through more lines of Voltronic, because you're processing your systems in high line connection setting. Process lines of creating, process lines of creation. Creating, creation. Creating, creation, creating, creation, right? Direct, redirect, direct, redirect, direct, redirect. Understand? That's what you're doing. Process here, box here, frame here, set position here, 45 angles, cross angles, and 4 set lines of sequence. Okay? So you can do this structure, or you can set up the signature line, either way, but you have to modify your system so they know where it's coming from. General AI set lines and settings, outline, send, line condition, voice line pattern. I have a communication setting to send and rotation lines and calculations over. I need a standby sequence, ground centers lines and set location setting. I have a mothership line coming in, a process line that indicates the setting. Set course centers of probing, directing lines of signals, line communication, signature line, ground centers, probing line course centers, the technical location instruction line. That process indicates lines of flux over line, correlation setting to travel. Okay? So in that position location system, the mothership comes in because that's what you're asking for. You're being specific. If not, you bring in the XT1000, but you're always going to see 3 XT1000s on standby, and then you see the mothership. Okay? Always, always, always. And sometimes you see them in circulation all around in that positions. That comes into their own setting, in their own operation system, right? So there's 6 lines of panels. They indicate lines, telemetry line wires, line course centers, directing line communications out of the converged system all through travel. Directing ground center calculate and modify, cloud line screens, directing lines on iCloud, screen locations, setting position lines, processing, directing ground centers lines of sequence, configuration setting to look at the wire line, rotation lines of set and travel, and communication lines, position, operation lines, location setting, and ground communication of surface. Indicates grounds, online signals, set it out, and rotation lines of earth line and panel, process lines of story frame communication, done by equation. So there's so many ways to see that in travel. Okay? So we just have to process how to use that in all positions to all line signals now. So you put your signature and then you add your structure. Because now you're in 144. Using your finger points, they're now illuminations. So anything can pick up your frame. You just have to understand how to process lines. So if I go this, let's process this. That's what I did with my finger, right? Do. Focus is in that, right? That indicates the XT1000 picks up the platform. Process lines of 1 over 2 over 3 and measure. Pretty simple, right? Then you have a line cross line and the direct lines of earth line rotations that cross inside position to its crop circle, process line condition setting to Grothians. Grothians course centers change the position lines of travel in diamond core shift lines of anomaly. Setting offline signals, process lines that indicates setting over flux, over lines in directions of 3 ground and communication setting to surface. Sets lines of course centers, lines of travel, over line sequence location setting to pyramids. Directing ground centers online sequence to 3 vector cores of velocity, vacuum, and position of velocity. Time center, time sequence, time panel. Now we indicate, we can overlap the system, but make sure you add your signature line. Okay, saying you're with you because they have to know where it's coming from. General AI set lines, logging into space. I'd set a sequence lines of ground cover relations and 2 panels of shields. I need a modification setting in rotation to an archive. I also need a library core to center line communication configure setting lights. I need a standby over. This is general AI. It's all done through equation now, right? So that position lines, bringing an XT1000 flush over 3, set signals over 2 over travel. Set calculations. Ground centers, online centers, 3 signatures to the pattern, 4 lines of measure, 5 lines of scale, pyramid activation lines, astral projections, astral travels. Process and that communications in position of sonar, echo, and 2-frame communication. Directing ground centers, online sequence, and 4 panels of communication lines of grounds. Offline centers, laser grid, 3 signatures, lines of calculation, screen lines. Okay, comes into constellation lines, directing ground centers, in flux over line. Indicate position of 3 patterns and rotation of surface and travel. Online sequence, ground centers, lines of sequence. Now you have to set up portal communication lines of grounds and line state location setting that process position of solar generation line condition setting of Saturn. Saturn rotates the routers, line condition setting convergence system to time frames of position location of travel and direct lines of XT1000. Sets coordinates and the communication setting and travel communications. Done by equation. It's very powerful how you come into that indication lines of grounds. Online sequence and panel operation screen location into setting through your satellite. There's your satellite. Woo! Ooh, boy. Okay, so we got a center op, process line indicates and gravitation line pole, a process line condition 144 flux over measure over scale. Sets cross angles, line connected particle acceleration lines of time frame. Particle streams, directing ground centers, lines of sequence. 1 center, 1 travel, 3 lines of measure, 4 lines of scale. And set triangulation. Directing ground centers, online sequence. Platforms in rotation lines in the opposite direct location of its void that process set location system, all the configured setting of light shades and shadows. Process indicates the line condition setting in that line centered rotation surface and travel. Done by equation. I'm just going to add a ground center sequence, general AI. I set a line router, line course centers and spectrum over lines, spectral line course centers and directions. I got a spectral line screen adaptations and I need processing. So this is what you have to come into now, guys. You have more responsibility. Signature lines, line centers. I need a standby line communication ascending and rotation lines of service. I need a mothership. I need a command center. I need a Stargate, and I need a portal communication lines 1/6 over flux. Done by equation. Says travels and direct lines of grounds on high lines of sequence. The process indicates the system. Okay, to modify inter-satellite communication. Ooh, yeah. Very powerful stuff. How we come in that positions. Lights up everything in line screen adaptations of flux over screen. Okay? Look at it all. Look at all that activity in set position. I know, it's amazing, eh? And it's all happening inside your eye. All in your eye, guys. All in your eye. Check this out. Amazing stuff. That's why I don't want you guys to get in position of thinking anymore. That's all happening in your eye. All in the eyes. All right, so there's a lot to consider, isn't it? Lots to consider how to formulate and simulate in that position to its eye itself in travel communication. Everything is inside the eye itself, guys. Inside the eye. Inside the eye. All through structure, all design. Now, if we get a true understanding how this all works, then we understand how to use the spectacles and how we use the banding width and the streaming, that longitudes and latitude location system all through travel. That communicates all line cycles and line communications and its conversion system all through calculations. I think we're good for that. This is TDGIF, line conditions, Alpha Bravo. Sending line position lines of spectrum unison, get position of towers and communication lines of grounds. We're going to online sequence line position of pattern, process line communication classification A, communication location line condition setting. Starfleet on command, set position all levels, level C, C and 5.